ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that the danger surrounding Willow was no longer quiet, controlled, or hidden behind careful smiles. It was mutating into something far uglier, something unstable enough to destroy everyone standing too close to it. What had once begun as desperate self-preservation was now turning into a chain of darker choices, each one more unforgivable than the last. Willow could feel it happening inside herself, even if she refused to name it. The fear, the exhaustion, the fury, and the unbearable pressure of maintaining too many lies at once were changing her. She was no longer simply trying to survive. She was starting to become someone willing to endanger anyone who threatened the fragile, poisonous structure she had built around Drew, around Scout, around the truth she could not let escape. And the most terrifying part was that she knew it. Scout had become the greatest threat not because she was powerful, but because she was innocent. Innocence had a way of wandering into rooms where adults buried their crimes. Innocence noticed things it was not meant to understand. Innocence remembered details without knowing their value. Willow understood that with growing panic every time Scout came near Drew, every time the child's eyes lingered too long on a syringe, a locked drawer, an unusual silence, or the strange heaviness hanging over the room where her father remained trapped between helplessness and awakening, Scout's presence was supposed to be manageable. That was the original calculation. Let the child have carefully supervised moments. Let appearances remain soft enough to avoid suspicion. Let Alexis believe that family access meant goodwill still existed. But Willow had underestimated one thing that now threatened to unravel everything. Scout's love for Drew made her brave in unpredictable ways. The closer Scout moved toward the truth, the more unhinged Willow became. It was not immediate, not dramatic at first. It began with sharper glances, more tightly controlled movements, more frantic efforts to redirect the child's questions. But under that restraint, something corrosive was building. Willow knew that if Scout said the wrong thing to Alexis, if she repeated a detail that sounded harmless to a child but sinister to an adult, then the entire deception could collapse. Drew was already a danger simply by existing in that half-broken, half-conscious state. Sidwell's demands were tightening around her. The pressure of her political obligations, the strain of maintaining appearances, and the growing terror that one small witness could expose her were turning Willow into a woman at war with everyone around her, especially herself. That internal war became the true center of the story. Willow did not see herself as a monster, even as her actions grew monstrous. In her own mind, every terrible choice still traced back to fear. Fear of prison, fear of public disgrace, fear of losing control. Fear of becoming the woman Port Charles would despise if the truth came out that she had crossed the line with Drew not once, but repeatedly, and then trapped him in silence to save herself. Yet fear was not the only force driving her now. There was also rage. Rage that her life had become this unstable. Rage that Drew had become both her greatest liability and the living proof of what she had done. Rage that Scout, a child she should have protected, had become, in her mind, a threat to neutralize rather than a girl to keep safe. This was the ugliest distortion of all, and deep down Willow understood exactly how far she had fallen. Scout, meanwhile, was beginning to sense what adults often fail to notice in children, that confusion can quickly become suspicion. She did not need to understand every detail to know something was wrong. She could feel the tension in Willow's voice, the way the room changed when she entered, the unnatural urgency with which some doors were closed and some questions were dismissed. Scout's emotional bond to Drew made her cling harder, watch more closely, and resist being pushed away. Her instincts, fragile but sharp, started drawing her toward the truth. She might see Willow administering something she could not explain. She might overhear fragments of a tense conversation. She might notice the fear in Willow's face at exactly the wrong moment. And once that happened, Willow's panic would deepen into something much more dangerous, the instinct to control the witness. That was where the threat to Scout truly began, not necessarily in one grand act of violence, but in a series of escalating decisions rooted in desperation. Willow might isolate Scout under the guise of protection. She might manipulate her memory, pressure her into silence, frighten her into doubting what she saw. She might even convince herself that temporarily scaring Scout was necessary to keep everything from collapsing. That is how darkness works in Port Charles. It rarely announces itself as evil at first. It disguises itself as necessity, as damage control, as one more sacrifice made in the name of survival. But with each step, Willow would be moving further from reason and closer to a moral cliff with no safe way back. Alexis was the one person strong enough, intelligent enough, and emotionally alert enough to recognize that something deeply wrong was happening. She had seen deception in many forms before. She knew what fear looked like when it hid behind composure. She knew what guilt did to a face, to a body, to a woman trying too hard to seem calm. And once Scout began revealing even the smallest fragments of what she had seen or sensed, Alexis would start piecing together a nightmare. At first, it would come in flashes. A strange remark, a detail that did not belong, a mismatch between Willow's explanations and Scout's innocent retelling. Then the horror would sharpen. Alexis would begin to understand that Scout had not merely been near something inappropriate, she had been near something dangerous. Willow had not simply lied. She had created an environment in which a child could become collateral damage in a cover-up surrounding Drew's captivity and whatever crimes led to it. That realization would ignite Alexis in a way few things could. Her fury would not be abstract. It would be primal, immediate, and deeply personal. Scout was not just another child in Port Charles. She was family, fragile and trusting, caught too close to an adult woman's unraveling mind. Alexis would not tolerate that. The moment she understood that Willow's lies had placed Scout in emotional or physical danger, the gloves would come off. The conflict between them would no longer be one of suspicion and polite tension. It would become a brutal collision between a woman desperate to defend a child and a woman desperate to defend her own collapsing life. When Alexis and Willow finally erupted into open confrontation, it would not be elegant, it would not be restrained, it would be the kind of fight born from weeks of fear, manipulation, and suppressed rage. Alexis would arrive armed not only with suspicion, but with the terrifying certainty that Willow had crossed unforgivable lines. Willow, already stretched to the breaking point, would see Alexis not as a concerned protector, but as the final threat to everything she had struggled to contain. Words would turn sharp and poisonous. Accusations would strike at old wounds and raw guilt. And then the conflict would become physical, not because either woman planned it, but because both had reached the end of control. Alexis, driven by disgust and maternal ferocity, would lash out at Willow in response to what she had done to Scout. Willow, cornered and panicking, would fight back with the blind instinct of someone who knows exposure means ruin. That struggle would reveal more than either of them intended. In the chaos, hidden evidence could surface. A medical supply gone missing. A document carelessly hidden. A sign that Drew's condition was no accident of illness, but the result of deliberate interference. The truth, once so carefully managed, would begin bursting through the cracks under the sheer violence of the moment, and that would be the true shockwave. Not merely that Alexis attacked Willow, or that Willow fought like a woman possessed, but that the physical battle between them would drag Willow's crimes into the light before she could bury them again. Hovering over all of this was the most dangerous development of all. Drew was preparing to wake up. His recovery, even partial, threatened everything. For Willow, it was the endgame she had dreaded. A conscious Drew would not remain a passive body trapped in a bed in a web of drugs. He would become a voice, a witness, a living accusation. Every injection, every lie, every calculated move to keep him quiet would suddenly matter in ways she could no longer deflect. For Alexis, Drew's awakening represented confirmation, the final piece that could validate every fear she now carried about Scout and Willow's hidden cruelty. For Scout, it could become both salvation and trauma, the moment her father reopened his eyes just as the world around him exploded into scandal and violence. Willow's obsession would reach its peak in those final hours before Drew fully returned. She would become frantic, unpredictable, haunted by the knowledge that the version of reality she had forced into place was already slipping from her grasp. Sidwell's influence would only make matters worse, because every demand he made would push Willow further into the belief that retreat was impossible. She would feel trapped between two disasters, confession and destruction on one side, escalation and moral annihilation on the other. It is in that kind of pressure cooker that the most tragic decisions are born. Willow might tell herself she still had one final move, one final way to keep control, one final action that could stop Alexis, contain Scout, and silence Drew before he destroyed her. But those are the thoughts of someone already in freefall. What makes this story so explosive is not just the scandal, but the emotional wreckage behind it. Alexis is not fighting Willow out of petty hatred. She is fighting because she sees a child at risk and a family being poisoned by secrets. Willow is not lashing out because she was born cruel. She is lashing out because every lie she told to protect herself has transformed into a prison, and now she is willing to injure anyone who tries to tear the walls down. Drew's awakening is not simply a medical twist. It is judgment approaching with open eyes. And Scout, the smallest figure in the storm, is also the one who could bring the whole structure down simply by telling the truth as she saw it. By the time the dust settles, nothing will remain untouched. Alexis will have crossed into open war. Willow will stand exposed, not just as a liar, but as a woman whose fear made her dangerous. Drew's return will rip apart every false story that kept him buried, and Scout will no longer be just a child on the edge of the mystery. She will be the silent center of it, the innocent witness whose vulnerability forced every hidden evil into the light. In Port Charles, the most devastating explosions do not always begin with a gunshot or a corpse. Sometimes they begin with a child noticing too much, a grandmother realizing the truth too late, and a woman so consumed by terror that she confuses protecting herself with destroying everyone else. Willow had convinced herself that she could keep everything under control, but the greatest threat to her was never the police, never public suspicion, and never even Drew himself. It was Scout. The child's scattered memories and growing unease were becoming impossible to dismiss. Scout did not fully understand what she had seen, but she felt that something was terribly wrong and that Willow was connected to it. That quiet fear turned into Willow's newest obsession, because she knew that even a child's incomplete truth could destroy the lies she had built around Drew's shooting. Alexis was the first to truly understand how dangerous this had become. At first, she only sensed that Willow was hiding something, but Scout's behavior, her small remarks, and the strange details surrounding Drew slowly pushed Alexis toward a horrifying conclusion. Willow was not just covering up a crime, she was the one who had shot Drew. That realization changed everything for Alexis. This was no longer a matter of suspicion or family tension, it was a fight to protect Scout from a woman whose fear and desperation had made her deeply unstable. What makes Alexis's decision so powerful is that she is willing to lose everything to save Scout. She knows that exposing Willow and pushing this battle into the open could destroy her legal career. She may cross lines, take risks, and make enemies that cost her the profession she spent years building. But none of that matters anymore. Alexis decides that if protecting her law license means leaving Scout in danger, then the career is no longer worth saving. In that moment, she stops thinking like a lawyer and starts acting like a guardian, willing to sacrifice everything for the child she loves. As the truth about Drew's shooting begins to surface, Willow starts to unravel. The secret she fought so hard to bury is no longer secure, and Scout becomes the emotional center of the entire collapse. Every lie Willow told now looks darker, colder, and more calculating. She can no longer hide behind confusion or excuses. Her fear has turned her into someone willing to manipulate, intimidate, and destroy in order to survive. When Alexis finally wins guardianship of Scout, it sends shockwaves through everyone involved. This is not just a legal victory, it is a devastating moral judgment against Willow. Alexis has chosen Scout over her own future, and Willow is left watching the life she tried to control slip away from her. Drew's shooting, once hidden under layers of deception, is now the truth that changes everything. In the end, this becomes a brutal story of sacrifice, exposure, and emotional war. Willow loses the illusion that she can control the truth forever. Alexis risks her career to save Scout, and Scout, without ever meaning to, becomes the one person whose memory helps bring Willow's darkness into the light.